fast food, oil, and entertainment industries and doing a ratio analysis of those 3 industries and 5 companies within each industry. So the first thing we're going to look at is the fast food industry and its liquidity. So for fast food, I've chosen Jack in the Box, Yum, which is KFC, Wendy's, McDonald's, and Shake Shack, and I'm going to be covering years 2012 to 2016. So the current ratio is your current assets over your current liabilities. Do you have enough current assets to cover your current liabilities? If so, how many times over? The quick ratio is the same thing, except you take inventory out of it. So it's your current assets minus inventory over your current liabilities. Cash is cash over current liabilities. So if we look at these 5 companies here, these are the best 2. We're picking Wendy's and McDonald's. So if you look at Wendy's and McDonald's, you look at their current ratio. Look at the current ratio for both of them. They have enough current assets to cover their current liabilities. Wendy's, in fact, also has enough current assets, if you take inventories out of it, to cover their current liabilities, with the exception of here, where it's just about 1 time over, and then cash ratio is good for both of them in all the years. You want this number to be high, but you don't want to be too high. You don't want to have just a bunch of cash that you're sitting around not doing anything with, but you don't want a low number, a number below 0, to show that you don't have the ability to liquefy and pay off your liabilities. The next thing we're going to look at is leverage. So for leverage, we're looking at the equity multiplier, which is your assets over your equity, and it shows the amount of magnification you're going to get towards your return. So we have debt. How much debt do we have? Do we have too much debt? So this number here shows us if we have too much debt. Your EBITDA over interest is, do we have enough in our earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization to pay off interest? If so, how many times? So as you can see, EBITDA over interest isn't available for Yum. You'll see throughout some of the companies that number is not available. So we're going to take a quick look at the equity multiplier, and you're going to see some funny stuff over here. In the year 2016, Jack in the Box, Yum brand, and McDonald's all had a negative equity multiplier. Equity multiplier is assets over equity, and so we all know that assets equals debt plus equity. This means that they had more debt than assets, so equity had to be a negative number to equal this out, giving us a negative equity multiplier, which we'll see down the road affects the return on equity. The 2 best companies we picked here, Wendy's and Shake Shack. Why? Well, there are 3 companies that in the most recent year had a negative equity multiplier. There are 2 that didn't. We'll take the 2 that didn't. You can also see that from year to year, the 2 companies that didn't have a negative equity multiplier, they didn't have a negative equity multiplier at any point in time, and they were fairly consistent, especially Wendy's here. So fast food asset utilization. For that, we use total asset turnover. Total asset turnover, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We have our sales and we have our assets. So how many times of our assets do we make in sales dollars? So if we have just as many sales dollars as assets, you're going to get a 1 or close to 1 here. So this means that Jack in the Box and Yum brand, in these years that are above 1, they're selling more than they have in total assets. You can see here Shake Shack 2012, Shake Shack started. So Shake Shack's a fairly new company. Okay, the best 2 companies in this industry, Jack in the Box and Yum brand. They're the ones that I was talking about. You can see here that Wendy's does a pretty bad job with asset utilization. So does McDonald's. You want this number to be at or above 1. These are the only 2 that are fairly consistently at or above 1. Next, we have profitability. So profitability, we have the return on equity, ROE. ROE can be broken down into 5 parts. It is your tax burden, your interest burden, your operating margin, your total asset turnover, and your equity multiplier. So it's your net income over equity, but it can be broken down into those 5 pieces, which are net income over earnings before taxes. That's your tax burden. Earnings before taxes over earnings before interest and taxes. That's your interest burden. Earnings before interest and taxes over sales. That's your operating margin. Sales over assets. That's your total asset turnover. Assets over equity. That's your equity multiplier. So we look at the 5 part here. We see a few things that stick out that are sort of weird. First thing we see is that Jack in the Box in 2015 had one of the greatest return on equities I've ever seen, 689%. percent return on equity. So we have to figure out where this is coming from, why it went from this to negative 58 the following year. Second strange thing we see, McDonald's. Okay, there's another one, negative 191. That's a lot. Okay, this is also negative. We got to figure out why we have these negative things. I have a feeling it's going to be what we talked about earlier with the negative equity multiplier and them having too much debt. Third strange thing we see here is Yum Brand. We're missing 3 years of information on return on equity. Of course, this is the 5-part return on equity, the 5 parts I talked about, so we'll get into that. So, a closer look, the first thing is the Jack in the Box in the year 2015 had a ridiculous ROE, close to 690%. So we break it down into the 5 pieces. The first piece, the tax burden, then the interest burden, operating margin, total asset turnover, equity multiplier. These 4 pieces right here are known as ROA, and then we multiply ROA times the equity multiplier, and that's how we get our ROE. So this ROA is 8.4%. So they're making 8.4%, but then they have so much debt that it's being magnified 81 times to give us this extraordinarily high ROE. Okay, this is, as you can see, assets over equity is the equity multiplier. So they have $1.3 billion in assets and only just under $16 million in equity. So we take that to the next year. The next year's 2016. We saw the drop go from 689 to 58. It's about 750%, all the way, decreased down. So we have their tax burden, interest burden, operating margin, total asset turnover. Those all look pretty comparable, fairly the same from year to year. In fact, ROA went up. ROA went up from 8.4 to 9.4%. So what does leverage do? Leverage magnifies gains, leverage magnifies losses. Here we see leverage is negative. We have the total assets of 1.34 billion and total equity of negative 200 million. Well, how's that done? Like I said, assets equals debt plus equity. So if the assets are this high and the equity is so low in the next year, and then the debt increases, now you have assets, yeah, they went up a little bit, but the debt went up so much that the equity actually became negative, giving you a negative equity multiplier. So if debt is greater than assets, then equity is negative, and that will magnify this into a loss return on equity, negative 58%. So that's the first thing we looked at. That explains why we went from here to here as well. The next thing we want to see, McDonald's. Why was McDonald's so negative in terms of ROE on the most recent year, 2016? I have a feeling it's going to be the same thing as explains Jack in the Box's year 2016. And of course, we take a look, tax burden, interest burden, operating margin, total asset turnover, all fine, negative equity multiplier. So once again, too much debt, so assets or debt plus equity, and if the debt is greater than the assets, the equity is negative. So we say that's weird, that's 2 companies. Let's look at all the companies in the industry and look at their equity multipliers of 2016, the only year we ever saw a negative one. Jack in the Box negative, Yum Brand negative, McDonald's negative, Wendy's and Shake Shack still positive. Yum just a little negative, so this is weird. This is something you see specific to this industry as well. All right, so that's those 2 things taken care of. The third thing is right here, we're missing 3 years of ROE data on Yum Brand, of course, KFC. So we'll take a closer look at it. We need the ROE. We have to figure out ROE. ROE is, if you could pick one number, it's the single most important number you can pick. Well, okay, the Bloomberg data gave us no interest burden. We had no interest burden information for those 3 years, and so we can figure out ROE a different way. ROE can be broken down into 5 parts, but it can also just be these 2 parts. Since we have the ROA and we have the equity multiplier, we can calculate the ROE. So you can see ROE here, and then there's the year we talked about, 2016. We have a negative equity multiplier, therefore we have a negative ROE. So now we go back to the fast food profitability. We throw in Yum's 2-part, give their measurement for all 5 years so we can compare it, do a peer group analysis. And what we see is that we're going to take these 2 as the 2 best companies. Wendy's, because it's constantly improving and it's always positive. Yum Brand, because with the exception of this 1 year where they did a bad job with debt, they've had the best returns on equity. So what I did next is return on equity can be broken down into 5 parts. It can be broken down into the tax burden, the interest burden, the operating margin, the total asset turnover, and the equity multiplier. Well, as management, what do you have the most control of? You have the most control of total asset turnover, your asset utilization, how are we utilizing our assets, and your operating margin. Okay, is our earnings before interest and taxes compared to our sales, how are we doing there? That's the stuff that management has the most control of. So I took those two in each company and I multiplied them together to get what I'm calling the management factor to show what effect does management have on ROE as opposed to taxes, which they don't have control of, interest, which they don't necessarily have the control of the rates, and debt, which is more of a bigger picture thing. It's something that they don't have as much direct control of. So if we take these for all the companies, we get to see what is management doing the best for these companies within the industry. Not, okay, Jack in the Box in 2015 had the greatest ROE I've ever seen, they're the best company ever. No, let's see what management is controlling, and let's not say, oh, it's because of they're not paying taxes, they don't have to pay interest expense, or they just magnified their gains with debt. So using that, you can see Wendy's here getting better every single year. Every single year, the management's getting better, the management factor is improving. But the two companies in the industry that I'm picking are Yum, because consistently high, McDonald's, consistently high. Fast food market valuation. So we do the market valuation, we have the economic value added spread, which shows, okay, this is how much money we made beyond our cost of capital. So it costs us this much to get money, and we earned this percentage above what it cost us. So obviously this needs to be a positive number, okay? The enterprise value over EBITDA is the enterprise multiple. It talks about, you know, acquiring a company and how much that would cost. Lower numbers better. You want a higher, you know, to show that a company's undervalued in the theoretical situation of taking over. So with this, that's your takeover price over your EBITDA. So the two best companies in here are Yum Brand. Again, that's KFC. We see a really good EVA spread pretty consistently. Weird year here, but pretty consistently. Even though that's a weird year, they're still positive, which means they're making more than the money cost. McDonald's, again, pretty consistent right there near the teens in EVA spread. And then as far as the enterprise multiple, pretty consistent throughout the industry. Shake Shack is weird. Shake Shack, for me, the biggest reason against Shake Shack, it's a new company. Needs more time to prove itself, and then there's also some exterior things. If you look at there, they have a larger volume of put options than call options being traded, so people are a little bearish on Shake Shack. I'm one of them. Cash flows. So cash flows is price to cash flow is here's our market cap and we're dividing it by our cash flow, or it's here's our share price divided by our cash flow per share. So you want this number to be as low as possible, because if two companies have the same share price or market cap, so let's say the two companies have the same share price and then one company has a higher cash flow per share, they have a higher denominator, which means that this number is going to be lower, which is better. You want a lower number. So because of that, we pick Yum Brand and we pick McDonald's. Okay, once again, Shake Shack, not very much information down here. Price to cash flow on these two, it's really not that different from company to company. Really no company in this industry really stands out. The biggest reason for picking these two was you'll see huge numbers in Jack in the Box and Wendy's, as opposed to fairly constant numbers in Yum and McDonald's. Okay, so the decision for fast food. Who are we picking? What are we going to do? We're picking Yum Brand. Okay, Yum Brand is KFC. That's who to pick. Why? Well, they're the best at asset utilization. They're utilizing assets most efficiently. They are selling the most for the base, compared to the assets they have. Profitability, so that's just straight ROE, and management, that's the management factor, that portion of the ROE, the operating margin, and the total asset turnover. Market valuation's good there. They're not overvalued, or compared to the other companies in the industry, they're not overvalued, and they do a good job with cash flows. Next industry, oil. So first we go to liquidity again. We have the current ratio, which is current assets over current liabilities, quick ratio, current assets minus inventories over current liabilities, and then cash over current liabilities. Two best companies in here, British Petroleum and Valero. So, why is that? Because both of these companies, just like the last industry, have the ability in their current assets to pay off their current liabilities. Valero has the ability to pay off their current liabilities using their current assets minus their inventory, and these companies both have a decent amount of cash on hand to where they can pay off their current liabilities, unlike Exxon, who, as you can see, very, very low cash. Leverage for oil. So we have debt. How much debt? Is it too much debt? So we're going to take a look here and see that Exxon and Chevron are the two best companies here. Okay, these are the only ones that are below 2 on the equity multiplier. These ones are a little bit more leveragey, a little more reliant on debt to drive ROE. The enterprise multiple on these is improving from year to year as well, so you can see that they're getting better. All right, oil asset utilization. This is something here you want to do peer group analysis and you want to do time series analysis, because if you take a look, what's the first thing you see? Okay, we're going across from year to year. This company's decreasing. This company's decreasing. So you're getting decrease from Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, British Petroleum, and Valero. So with the one exception that ConocoPhillips jumps up from 2012 to 2013, but then immediately falls down. Other than that, and it's barely a rise, every single year, these companies within this industry, which leads me to believe it's the industry as a whole, is utilizing assets less efficiently. So the industry itself is changing. That being said, we pick BP and we pick Valero because, well, Valero is the only one that's actually utilizing, that is selling more than its assets, and BP is the next best one. Profitability. So we go back to ROE. It's the 5-part ROE calculated here, and this just gives us the numbers. We pick the two best. Okay, we're picking Exxon because it's positive throughout. We're picking Valero because it's positive throughout. Okay, now this is before we take a closer look and we see what is driving these numbers, what's causing these negative numbers here, what's causing these low numbers, these changes. So we look into it further, and the things we want to see most are the management factors, the total asset turnover, and the operating margin. So what we calculate that management factor, and we see that, okay, Exxon and Valero are the two best companies, because you'll see that the operating margins for Chevron, the operating margins for Chevron and ConocoPhillips and BP are negative, and so that negative operating margin is very bad. It's your EBIT over sales, and you want that to be positive because that's something that you have significant control over. So next we have our market valuation. What does the market think of these companies? What does the market value these companies at? Are these companies making more than their cost of capital? So you see here, company making less than cost of capital, less than cost of capital, less than cost of capital, less than their cost of capital, and then here, barely less than cost of capital. So the industry as a whole is starting to make less than it's costing them to get the money. And so the two best companies in here, Valero, because they're the only EVA spread that's close to positive still, and they had positive 1 in 2015, which the other ones did not. And then Exxon, because it's the next best one. These other ones here are significantly losing money. Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and BP, they're all greater than 10% negative on the EVA spread. I mean, it costs them that much more to acquire capital than the amount that they're actually making. Now, in terms of cash flows, which company's doing the best? BP and Valero. So we have Valero, who is pretty constant every single year, and then BP, who's fairly constant every year too. Again, these within the industry, they're not that far off, but these two are slightly better. So the decision with oil, Valero. As you remember, Valero was the best at liquidity. It was the best at asset utilization. It was in fact the only one at asset utilization that had a total asset turnover ratio of above 1. Its profitability was the best, being its ROE and its management factor. So not just the ROE based on interest or taxes or debt being the magnifier of the gains, but actually based on the factors that management controls, which are the operating margin and the total asset turnover. It also had the best market valuation and cash flow. So this one was a blowout. Valero was significantly better than all of the companies in its industry. However, the industry as a whole, not so great. Trending down, doesn't look good for the future considering the way it's going, especially if you consider its EVA spread. Next and last industry is the entertainment industry. So the first thing we look at is liquidity. Can we pay for our current liabilities using our current assets, using our current assets without inventories, and using just cash? The two best companies we see in here are Discovery and 21st Century Fox. So Fox already has its 2017 numbers released, so I included them here in the end, as you can see. But I left 2012 in there because I wanted to have 5 of the same years to compare all these companies, but I'm not going to leave out Fox's most current data. So the reason we picked these, well, once again, just like in the last industries, current assets or current liabilities, they can pay off their current liabilities. Current assets minus inventory over current liabilities, they can pay off. So their quick ratio is above 1, they can pay off that way too. Fox's is pretty good. They have enough cash to almost pay off their current liabilities. Discovery's cash is comparable to the rest of the industry in that it's really nowhere close to the current liabilities, but they have it covered at their current assets and current assets even without inventories. So entertainment leverage. Now we have debt. How much debt? Is it too much debt? So we look at this and we want to see which company has too much debt and which companies have the ability to, with their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, pay off their interest, how many times they can do it. We see CBS and we see Disney are the two best companies here. We say that because the EBITDA over interest is really high for Disney. They make enough money in earnings before paying interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization that they can cover their interest, at the lowest 20 times and at their highest 41 times. CBS has a high EBITDA over interest as well, but its equity multiplier is a little higher. Disney's equity multiplier is not as high, which we like. That means it's not the debt, it's not the leverage that's driving the ROE. That's not what's giving us the best returns. So we like Disney for that regard. Entertainment asset utilization. Are we utilizing our assets efficiently? You can see here's the whole industry. What do you see that's common amongst the whole industry? Everyone's pretty much the same. You do some peer group analysis, you do some time series analysis. If you see time series analysis, numbers aren't changing year to year. That's pretty consistent. With a range of 0.02, that's pretty consistent. You do some peer group analysis and you see, okay, everyone's within this tight little window right around 50%. Okay, so for that, we're going to pick Disney and we're going to pick Fox just because, okay, they're the highest ones most consistently, and that's it. It's just a slight edge given to these two companies. Next, we have profitability. So the 5-part ROE is just shown as is without looking further into the numbers. We're picking two companies. But first, we're going to take a look and do another time series analysis, and we're going to see increase, we're going to see increase, we're going to see increase. So Disney, Discovery, Time Warner are all increasing their ROE over the last 4 years. We want to know how it's doing. So they're going up. Why is that? But before we look into that, we want to see which two, just based on what's right here, are we picking? We're picking CBS and Time Warner. So CBS, pretty good ROE right there. Time Warner, constant gains on ROE, and that's something we like to see. They had the most gains from 2012 to 2016, the past 5 years. So now we take a look at it further. We look at the stuff that matters most to us. That's total asset turnover, and that's operating margin. And we multiply those together to what I'm calling the management factor. And we see that Disney and Fox are the best companies in this regard. Why? Well, Disney, fairly consistent right here in terms of management factor. They have good operating margins, which leads to the good management factor because remember, their total asset turnover was in that tight window, very small range, just like the other companies. Fox, you see, is getting better every single year. Increase, 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 increase. We like Fox. Fox is trending up. They're doing stuff well, stuff that is important, management stuff. They're getting better at that every single year. Disney, improving but fairly constant. You can rely on Disney to be constant year to year, and you can kind of assume that Fox is going to keep getting better. People are bullish for Fox based on this right here. Entertainment market valuation. So now we're going to go back to the enterprise multiple and the EVA spread and say, all right, are these companies making more than their cost of capital? Which two companies are doing the best at this? Disney and Time Warner. Let's see. Disney, every single year, with the exception of 5 years ago, is making good money above their cost of capital. So what it costs them to acquire money, they're making beyond that in the amount of return. And then you see a positive EVA spread for Time Warner as well. And then the enterprise multiple here, these two are similar throughout the industry. They're all comparable, so we pick basically mostly on EVA spread. So we're going to look at the cash flows next. All right, what do we like? Cash flows, we like a lower number. We want to see someone that's undervalued. So we want to see a number constantly decreasing. And where do we see that? We see that here in Fox, and that's why we picked Fox as well as Discovery. Discovery, decreasing. Fox, decreasing. So we like that. We like that trend. We like the way that's looking. We want to see a company that's undervalued, and we like to buy that. So our decision in the entertainment industry comes down to two companies, Fox versus Disney. All right, what do we like about Fox? What do we like about Disney? So Fox, it's best at liquidity. It's best at asset utilization, but it's pretty close. It's barely best at asset utilization. Those are about the same. Disney was best at leverage. Disney had a really small, insignificant equity multiplier, which means that their ROE isn't being driven by magnification from debt. It's being driven by the other important stuff like the management factor, which Fox was also good at. Like I just said, management factor. These two companies were the best with the management factor. They do stuff well that they can control, not the stuff like paying taxes and interest. Fox was better at cash flows, and we saw them trending well with cash flows. Disney had a better market valuation. Disney, you know what you're going to get with Disney. They had pretty constant returns. So the question is, do we want the company that's looking good and trending good? Are we gonna bet on that? Are we gonna go with Disney, the one with constant returns that we feel more confident in? We know what we're going to get. I say Fox. Fox is trending the right way. Its cash flows and its management are great. Every single year that management factor is improving, and every single year the cash flow numbers are better. The price to cash flow ratio, price to free cash flow ratio is an improvement every single year. So now we have the best of the best. The best of the best being we pick the best company from each industry. Which of those companies is the best overall? So in third place we have Valero. Why is Valero less than Fox or Yum? Well, because the industry as a whole was on the decline. In terms of liquidity, asset utilization, and cash flows, those are all getting worse within the entire industry. Peer group analysis showed us the whole industry, and time series analysis is it's getting worse, and we don't like the numbers as much. Now that being said, Valero did more to separate itself from the other four companies in its industry than Fox did or than Yum Brand did, but the industry itself we don't like, and that's why Valero ranks third on our list of best of the best. Second, Fox. Okay, Fox was better than Valero because it's been a better industry. It had annual improvement in management and cash flow. So the management was getting better year to year, which is huge. That's the operating margin, that's the total asset turnover, that's the stuff we really look for to drive the ROE. Its cash flows were getting better every single year too. But Fox beat out Disney just because we prefer a company that's trending well, a company that looks good, looks at a bright future versus the constant stable return. And so that's just a preference, it's just an opinion. Fox and Disney, however, I would take both of them over Valero, okay, because the industry itself is better. Now, last and actually number one overall is Yum Brand. So the people that bring you KFC, well, they had too much debt in 2016. So 2016 made their ROE weird because it had too much debt. If you'll remember, the industry as a whole, three of the companies, everyone except for Wendy's and Shake Shack, had negative ROEs in the year 2016, and that was because they did a bad job with debt. So Yum, yes, too much debt. However, all the other numbers looked the best. They were the best at the asset utilization. They were the best with the management factor that I calculated. They had really good numbers. They just need to work on their mix of debt and equity. And so if that gets resolved, I would pick Yum Brand over the other ones. Also, with that being said, Yum, McDonald's, Wendy's, I pick them all over Valero. I would pick Yum over Fox and Disney. I would pick McDonald's about the same. Wendy's maybe a little below. Wendy's is similar to Fox in that it's trending upward. The management factor increasing every year. The cash flow is looking better every year. However, EVA spread, bad for Wendy's. Wendy's had a negative EVA spread in all 5 years showing, which means it's costing them more money. Their cost to acquire money is more than the amount that they're getting in return. So that's bad. That's why I didn't like Wendy's. Yum brand, best of the best. All good companies. This industry, question. Oil industry, questionable. Entertainment industry, fast food industry, good safe bets. These are your best companies in the industry. Thank you.